Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by and welcome to my care guide of sorts. I'll carry on where I left off yesterday and we'll see how we go. Oncidiums and intergenerics, many of all different sorts, and the only differentiation I've got is I've got one awkward toad, which is the Nellie Isla, and that does not like heat. It doesn't mind reasonable light, but it doesn't like to get warm. There's something in that one that makes it fussy. And fussy it is. I mean, I've got a spike on mine at the moment, pushing on, and the plant doesn't seem to be doing too bad. It objected to being repotted, but recovered quite quickly, and the latest growth has now got a spike, so that's okay. But in amongst the intergenerics, the bit to watch out for is the odontoglossums. They are cool growers and don't like the level of light that the other oncidium types like. So if you've got an intergeneric, if you can, which is not always easy, try and find out the percentage of odontoglossum in there, and if it's heading up to half, it's going to be a cool grower. It's not going to like the highlight that most of the other oncidiums can take. I've only got one oncidium species, and that's in all its glory at the moment. That's and it's no longer an oncidium. Bless his little cotton socks. It was when I bought it. Oh, look at the way the backlight through that red. It's glowing. That's a stunning plant. It was Oncidium varicosum. It's no longer. It got moved out of Oncidiums to something else. And when it arrived, there was already a varicosa there. So they had to change that part of the name as well. So it's totally changed its name now. But in my book, it stays as it was when I got it because I like its name, you know. So, but that's my only species. I've got a few twinkles. You can't have enough twinkles, they're smashing. They're not giants, but they make up for it in the weight and numbers and the very, very powerful fragrance for such small blooms. They really chuck it out. One of the parents is Soto something or other. I saw that species in Oliver's greenhouse. He had a massive blooming on his, and quite honestly, it went straight on the list. Because he said that the fragrance on that is incredibly powerful. That's where Twinkle gets its fragrance from. So that's on my list. That is a species, obviously. But all my other oncidiums and intergenerics, apart from those that are effectively, apart from the reclassification, to all intents and purposes, they're odontoglossums. And I try and keep those cooler by getting them down near the floor in the summer months where it is cooler, and I make sure that they've got good air movement around them to help keep the leaves cooler. Apart from the temperature range and a slight lowering of light levels for the odontoglossum types, they still drink. You know, they still like to be hydrated well, and you get something like, can I get at it? No. Things like Sherry Baby. Why is this one here? Oh, because it's got a spike. I was just going to say, what's this doing up here on my display shelf? It's because it's about to display. Things like this, Peter Comp, and my thingy. This is not a good time of day to film. My brain's gone. But there's another. Oh, there it is, at the back there. That big bush. I'll put a pop-up. The name just isn't coming to me at the moment. But they're big plants. They got repotted into pure Orchiata bark, and they're thirsty plants. So as a consequence, they come round to needing water far more often than the others that are in slightly older media or media that's had some moss added. They do like to drink, and they never stop growing, quite honestly. They continuously grow. Most of the oncidium types and intergenerics do not stop growing, and a lot of them haven't got an annual blooming cycle. It's about 9 or 10 months, and they bloom as their new growths mature. And you can have a plant with new growths just starting, new growths halfway up, and new growths just maturing. Well, it can bloom any time then, as far as I'm concerned. You know, that they have a blooming point on the latest growths. And once you know that, you can predict when they're going to bloom. And if you can get new growths to all come out at once, you can't plan it, but if it happens, the chances are you'll get a mass blooming because all of those growths will mature at the same time. So that's those. What else have we got? I've got a couple of maxillarias lurking. I've got this thing that's currently in bloom, but this is an oddity because this doesn't really grow like most other maxillarias, and it certainly doesn't bloom like it. That's the Arachnetiflora. I've still got two of these, split up an enormous plant. This is the best one of the three. The worst one of the three is still struggling a bit, but I think next year it will pick up again. I can't see it at the moment. Where's it hiding? Oh, there it is up there. It's still not doing bad, but it's not doing quite as well as that one. And the third one I did actually sell earlier in the year. What other maxillarias I've got? I haven't got tenuifolia anymore. I got rid of all of those. Danny had a big chunk when I split the plant up. She's still got that. Seems to be growing okay for her. Hopefully it'll bloom for her because I know she's looking forward to that. And the other parts of that plant I've now sold on or given away or done something with. They're gone anyway. They're no longer with me. There's a couple of other maxillarias. As far as I'm concerned, they can be treated like a oncidium types. You know, when they're growing actively in the growing season, they'll drink. They'll take a lot of hydration and they'll push on at quite a rate. They're quite fast growers. Most of them, I'll say, are fast growers. I've got a couple that aren't. All right, what else have we got? I've got some Miltonias, a couple of species, some hybrids, not that many. I've got some Miltoniopsis, and they're in the not dead yet category. They're down here, out of the bright light, little cluster of Miltoniopsis. They're not growing bad. I won't say they're bursting with health, but they're okay. And they've now got till about the end of April, May time, to put out a good root system to support them through the hotter weather, because they don't like the heat. Miltoniopsis and Miltonia are not the same. Miltoniopsis, cool, keep the light level below oncidium level. They don't like high light, they don't like warm temperatures, they do like air movement, and they are fussy tykes. They certainly are for me. Miltonias, quite honestly, exactly the same as oncidiums. When they're growing, they grow at quite a rate, and they'll drink, and they'll need some feed to push those growths up. But they'll take the temperatures, and they'll also take brighter light, so they're not the same. Strictly speaking, they are. I get technical now. Miltonias and Miltoniopsis. The Miltoniopsis have not got many species, and they are all but a name change, Miltonias by definition that come from a different part of the world. So they've been given their own genus. But they are, strictly speaking, technically, just a Miltonia that comes from a different part of the world. But that different part of the world dictates their care. That's important. Don't let them get warm. Don't give them intense light. Keep the air moving, and they are fussy. They do not like being disturbed. If you get the timing right, minimise the stress level to the plant, then repotting is not a big deal. Get it wrong, you'll lose your root system, and you sometimes lose the plant as well. They are a bit of a nuisance. Right, where are we now then? I think that's nearly it. Because I'm not doing every type of plant I've got, I'm doing the categories, the types, if you see what I mean. I suppose last on the list are the Vandas. I don't have a huge number. There's 4 mature Vandas up there, 2 in bloom at the moment. This one's going to go soon, I think. Showing signs. First sign on this Vanda is that it's going over, as it loses the purple off the lip. Unless I've knocked the polliner off like I did on the last spike. Blue one's still going well, but as far as Vandas are concerned in the UK, the best light you can give them, simple as that. And they drink and they feed. That's the highest level of food I would ever apply to an orchid goes on the Vandas. And certainly through the growing season they get fed every time they get watered. They get dunked in a bucket every single day and left to soak, fully hydrated daily. And they seem to be doing okay as a consequence. They would take brighter light than I can give them, but they get the best I can do without jeopardising other plants. Because they live there, I could take this bubble wrap back. The actual roofing is opaque polycarbonate double sheeting, which has, you know, it's not clear. So I could give them slightly brighter light, but then everything underneath that area would also get it, and it would be too much for the other types of plants, so I don't. That's really about it. It's only a general care guide, and I still say that you've got to get down to individual plant level to see if it needs something slightly different to what it's getting. And if your plant's bursting with life, does really well, blooms on a regular basis, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Because changing a plant's position can alter it. It can set it back even. You know, changing a light level to a greater extent. You know, the plant just sits there thinking, what's going on? I was happy where I was. But if it's not a happy plant, then try changing something. But I would advise not changing everything all at once. Do everything gradually. So if you think your plant's a little dehydrated, add a bit more water. If it's bursting with life with lots of new growths coming out, it's gonna need feed. So you might want to up the feed level during that transition and then ease off again as the plant matures those growths. Because once the growths are mature, in theory, the next thing it's going to do is bloom. And to get the blooms out, it doesn't need high levels of feed. It will draw on the energy in the plant. But don't stop feeding them. They still need some put in at the bottom. Some people recommend foliar feed. I don't not recommend it or recommend it because I don't do it. And the reason I don't do it is because I don't get my plants wet. It's just my way. I know other people miss their plants daily, give them a good spray, keeps the leaves nice and clean, I'll give it that. But I don't need to because my air humidity stays up, which does mean I get dusty leaves now and again. But I do break the rule when we get a little mini heat wave in the UK, once in a blue moon, at which point I will go around with the sprayer and give the plants a good soak in the morning, knowing they will dry off during that day. So don't get plants wet and then reduce their temperatures right down, especially if you've got very little air movement. It's a recipe for problems, quite honestly. Keep your plant dry, keep your air moist. Does them much more good. And it's a more natural environment for them. So that's it for today, a general care guide. And what I'm hoping is it might spark off questions where I've covered something perhaps a little bit lightly and somebody might want a bit more detail. Oh, poor little indoor plants get totally forgotten. Phalaenopsis, if you've got a species, look it up. Seriously, look it up. Some of them are not warm growers, some of them are cool growers. Some of them like to stay wet all the time, not dry off in between. So you need to look. Generally speaking, the hybrids, especially the more complex ones that have long since lost their history, I treat those with reasonable light, not high light, during this growing season. They're indoors at the moment, so it's as though they've got their dark glasses on because they don't get a lot of light in the winter, but what they get is warmth. And as far as I'm concerned, if you can keep them warm, they'll be happier. But when they're warm, they will use their moisture up quicker. Yeah? With my hybrids, they are allowed to totally dry all the year round, and then they get absolutely soaked in the growing season when I've got the temperatures and the longer days, but in the winter they get enough water to hydrate them and no more. They'll take high feed levels if you want to. I don't believe you have to, but they will take it. So if you make a bit of mistake and double your dose accidentally, you won't kill your Phalaenopsis, but you might kill some of your other plants, burn all the roots off. There's a limit to how much food orchids can take, and in the wild they don't get a lot. You know, they get a little when it rains, otherwise they don't get much at all. You know, so. Phalaenopsis, what else? I've got some Paphiopedilums. They're in the house because all the ones I've got are the mottled leaves types. Quite honestly, I don't actually like the plain green ones because the plant doesn't do much for me, and because they spend such a huge portion of their life not in bloom, the mottled leaf ones I'll put up with because the plants are attractive. They are beautiful, those leaves, so even when they're not in bloom, they're an attractive orchid to have. But again, if they do get dry through the winter months, keep it to an absolute minimum. Those roots will just go. If they dry out and stay dry for any length of time, they're not going to like it. It's one of those evenly moist all the time, which is impossible, because when you water it, they've got more water than they need, and then that starts to get used up and dries off, and then they've got less than they need. So it's a goal to try and aim at, but you'll very rarely get it there. And giving a dribble of water to an orchid every day is not the best of ideas. It's better, if you're going to water it, get on and water it, and then don't until it needs some more. That's more like how they would grow naturally. So that's about it. Oh, I've got a couple of Psychopsis. They were once in the Oncidium categories, and quite honestly, apart from the fact they don't seem to like quite such high light as some of the other Oncidiums can take, they do like to stay moist at the roots and not dry off, and certainly not bone dry. They need to stay hydrated. And since both of mine weren't doing too well, I repotted them with the couple of inches below the plant in pure sphagnum moss, and below that there is some bark. So that the idea being that if the roots get going, at least part of the root system stays hydrated permanently, because I wouldn't let that sphagnum moss dry out totally. And one of them has responded dramatically and has filled its little pot with roots. The other one is lagging behind, but it must be getting hydrated because it's still supporting its flower spike and is currently pushing out another bud. Perpetual bloomers, those. Last but not least, Tolumnias, and they are nothing more than reclassified Oncidiums, quite honestly, but they're different. They need a fast wet-dry cycle. How you achieve it's up to you. But you keep roots soggy on a Tolumnia, chances are you'll lose them. They like to dry off, and if you can do that daily, they are in their ideal world. Literally, soaking wet in the morning, they hydrate fast, they're adapted to taking in water very fast, because a lot of the time the only water they get is the morning dew, and they grow bare-rooted on twigs and things, and you find the roots run along under the branches of the bushes and shrubs that they grow on deliberately, because as the water forms, when the dew forms, it rolls round to the underside of the branches. Also, that's the shady part, so the roots aren't in the full sun even if the plant is. So they're very clever little plants, but they like wet, dry, fast. So what you grow them on, not in, is up to you. They'll grow on nothing. They'll attach to the side of a clay pot, inside or outside. They'll quite like lava rock. Chunky bark might be okay, providing it's new and doesn't stay wet for long. I grow all mine mounted. They're all fired up here at the moment, some doing better than others, some doing great, and some not doing very well at all, but others coming on fine. They are dependent on a root system. They're succulent, big fleshy leaves, so they are different to Oncidiums, but they were once called Oncidiums, but not anymore. As far as I'm concerned with Tolumnias, they don't need high levels of feed, but in the growing season they will move faster. Their new growths will push on faster than like now in the winter time, and obviously they'll take feeding more frequently. But I still go, with these I go for the same methodology as I do with virtually all my orchids. They get a little very often. The frequency is purely dependent on the time of year and what they're up to. So in the summer these would probably get low to medium feed every single time I water them for 3 or 4 waterings, then they'll get a flush. And then back to feeding again. This time of year they get a lower level feed, because they're not growing as fast, every other watering. And sometimes it's every third watering. It depends whether I can be bothered to mix the feed up. But they're not using that feed at a great rate this time of year. They'll take good light right up to and including full sun if acclimatized very, very gently. They can burn, yeah? And if you get little reddish purple dots on your leaves, you've probably got the light about right. If the whole plant starts turning a bit red and purple, you might have overcooked it a bit or done it too quickly. If you've got dark green shiny leaves, the chances are they're not getting enough light. So that's Tolumnias, and I love them. They don't take up a lot of space. I mount mine simply because I've got hanging space coming out of my ear rolls. I'm short on shelf space. So if I did put them in little clay pots or open baskets, I'd have to find somewhere to put those. I like them mounted. They just look nice that way. Even though, strictly speaking, that's not how they would grow. They tend to grow on smaller branches and even out on twigs, and they attach themselves there. But good light, wet-dry cycle, faster the better. Daily, perfect, and they'll do well. That's about it. There's a couple of other oddities lurking around, but as I said, there's an awful lot of things just get lumped together. My Odontoglossums, I've only got one true species, that's that one, and that's, as far as I know, that's Naivium. That's still called Odontoglossum. So the whole lot didn't get moved lock, stock and barrel into Oncidium and assorted other places. Some of them stayed there, but I don't think there's many true Odontoglossums left. But, you know, the higher the percentage of an Odontoglossum or an old-fashioned Odontoglossum cross that now will have a name of Oncidium, but if you can find its backup, you know, where it came from, and it started out as a couple of Odontoglossums, keep it cooler, not quite such bright light, don't let them dry off for any length of time. They should do okay. It's just that proviso that if there's a reasonable amount of Odontoglossum in something, it needs to stay cooler. If it hasn't got any of that, you know, a lot of the other intergenerics have got brassias mixed in and different types of Oncidiums. They might have a bit of Miltonia thrown in. Well, all of those like good light and don't mind the heat. So the intergeneric will just follow that path. But once you whack an Odontoglossum in there in a reasonable percentage, you've automatically decided it shouldn't be quite so bright and it should stay cooler. So yeah, a random care guide, and it's very generalised. But as I said, I mean, if you want any more details about what I do for any of my plants in particular, just stick a comment in, and I'll get round to it eventually, and we'll go from there. As I say, I don't do these sort of videos because, you know, everybody's environment's different, and what's absolutely perfect in one environment for one orchid grower, you know, might not be suitable for somebody else. So you always got to think, what is my environment like? How is it different from the advice I've just been given? And does that still make that advice okay? Or should I look somewhere else to people who grow more similar to me? And I'm happy with that. I've got my environment that I'm happy with, and it does reasonably well for most of my plants. There's a couple don't like it so much, but they don't do bad. But my environment is the way it is. It's not a house, it's not a windowsill, and although it looks like it, it's not a greenhouse. The subtle difference is where I'm standing now, in the doorway. Now I'm in my house. Yeah? It's not a greenhouse. It may look like it. It's a grow room. That's why I've given it another name. A greenhouse would have light coming in from 4 sides and above. I've got light coming in from 3 sides and above. Subtle difference there. But what I've got is the ability for heat to run out of the house into here. It's borrowed heat, which saves me blasting my electricity bill with the actual heater all the time. Yeah? So it's attached to the house. It gains some warmth in the winter time from the house. That also dries the air out a bit, because obviously the air in the house is a lot drier than what it is out here naturally. And far as temperature goes, in the summer I try and keep my maximum temperature 27, 28. When we get those little heat waves, I do lose the battle, and it has got up to 31, 32 on one occasion, but I try and limit that by having an extractor fan near the roof. That sucks air out of here at a rate of knots. It's a powerful fan. It moves a lot of air quite quickly. Well, having sucked all the hot air out, down in there behind the bubble wrap is an inlet fan, which is exactly the same as that one, but the other way round. So that sucks in, hopefully, cooler air from the shadiest low level that I've got. And the outside temperature is not normally up at those levels, but when we had those heat waves where the outside temperature was 28, 29 degrees, all I was doing was losing my humidity, because the air I was pulling in was the same temperature as in here. But unfortunately that does suck out the humidity. And to replace that, I've got 3 foggers. They work hard at those times of years. They very rarely come on in the winter time. More than enough humidity out here. For the temperatures I've got anyway, so yeah. And obviously I reduce my light level down with shade netting once we get into the really long days and the sun at its brightest point. Through that glass, that might be just a bit too much for most of my plants, so I adjust as the seasons go with light and with the way my air works. I've got a circulating fan up here which oscillates, and once we get out into the spring and the daytime temperatures start to climb, I've got another bigger one that's on a stand that lives in that corner and also oscillates. Between the two of them, they can create a mini gale, which when the temperatures are high is perfect. The plants love to have that air moving round at a reasonably rapid rate when it's warm. Do it in the winter, it's called a draft. In the summer, it's a cooling breeze. Subtle difference. Don't let trying to get air movement chill your plants. Yeah, just put your hand where your plants are and feel the effect of whatever you're using to circulate your air. And if that feels uncomfortable on your hand, chances are it's uncomfortable for your plants. Now, we all know when we're hot and sticky, standing in the front of the fan is gorgeous. It's a cooling effect. Well, if we're liking it, chances are the plants are. So that's air circulation. Do your best with humidity. I know it's not always possible to keep it high. During the summer months, I have a minimum requirement of 70% humidity. I don't let it drop any lower. It will naturally climb higher at night as the temperature drops down a bit, but it's the daytime that's important. When things are growing, you know, I've got the good air circulation and my foggers work hard to keep my humidity up. And it works. For me, in here, it works pretty good. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm sorry about all the banging and clattering going on in the background, but as I said, they're demolishing some garages ready to build some houses. So once the demolition phase is over, the noise level should drop off for a bit. You know, once they actually start doing the building, the noise level will go right down. But it's really noisy out there at the moment. So okay, see you next time. Hopefully there's some useful bits in there. And any elaborations or more details, ask a question, I'll see what I can do. I don't always profess to know answers. When I don't, I try and look things up. And if I still don't get what I'm happy with the result in looking it up, I'll say I don't know, sorry. I'd rather give no information than give something that's not very good. So unless I'm reasonably confident with the information, I won't give it. I don't like leading people up the garden path and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, see what you can do, chuck some comments in, and hope you enjoyed this mini care guide of a random set of plants, because I do have quite a lot of different types of plants in here. And they all seem to manage. There are some that are not happy at certain times of year and are happy at other times, some that are not happy at all, but they just about struggle, and some that absolutely love it. So it's a little balancing and a bit of averaging and doing what I can. Generally speaking, things are working okay. And every year I change a little thing here and there to see if I can do a little bit better. There will come a time where it's as good as it gets. The plants I've got, the environment I've got, the controls I've got will be as good as it gets. I don't think I'm there yet. That's why I've just tried that, taking that shade netting off. A little, well, it's actually a big change. A little worrying at first, but I think I'm okay. I've had the sun coming in through there, and it's okay. Nothing's singed, nothing's burnt. It all looks good so far, and it's going to be doing those resting dendrobiums the absolute world of good. It's the best light they've ever had. And I've reduced the temperature slightly out here because I removed the warm growers into the house, so I can lower it a bit. And last year I never let it drop below 15. This year I've lowered that to 13.5 degrees C, so that's my minimum out here now. It's just that extra degree and a half, mainly for those resting dendrobiums. So we'll see what effect that has, if I see any effect at all. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by. Oh, and I know not everybody is subscribed to every channel in the world, but Rachel and Astrid, not quite sure how they're doing this, they're doing a combined live broadcast at 6 o'clock GMT this coming Sunday. Yeah? I don't know how they've managed it, and at the moment I don't want to know, because I'll see how it works first. I may try that one day in the future if I can get an idiot to join me. But yeah, a joint live broadcast with one in the States, one in Ireland, and two totally different growing environments coming online at the same time. Sounds like even more fun. So, you know, just a little plug for those two, not necessarily for their channels, although they are good channels. But for me, that sounds like a one-off experience. I don't remember anybody ever attempting to do a joint live broadcast on the YouTube Orchid channels. So let's all pile in there and bombard them with comments to such an extent that they can't keep up, like what I had to do. I'm hoping to be there, and yeah, get in there and say hi. Think up some nice awkward questions for them. It's going to be a hoot, I'm sure. 6 o'clock GMT this coming Sunday, Astrid and Rachel online together. Give it a go, should be fun. See you there. Bye for now. The only thing I didn't mention, there's always a bit to add on, you know me, is that each year, either because somebody sends me a box full of things I didn't have before, or I choose a new genus and I get a few plants to see how they will do. And the plants for next year, Draculas. So anybody who's got loads of Draculas, give me a couple of names of the easiest ones you've got, so that I've got something to start with that doesn't die in 2 weeks. But I'm not attempting to get any new plants until the warmer weather comes. I mean, I do buy some online. I'm not putting up with plants in the post at this time of year, so it's just not worth it. I may pay a visit to Burnham's and see what they've got lying around in that arena. But yeah, my idea for next year is, and I'm not limiting it. I mean, if I see something I fancy and it sounds like it'll do okay in here, I'll give it a go. But at the moment, the types of orchids I've got I'm happy with, mostly. But I thought I might give Draculas a go. Yeah, I mean, if I can grow Masdevallias sort of okay and Restrepias pretty well, I should be able to grow Draculas, you know. So that's my idea for next year. That will be my new genus. Just a couple of plants, see how they do. If they do okay, perhaps a couple more, and then perhaps a few more. If they do really well, they can replace the Masdevallias that don't do so good. But that's my idea for next year, for a new type of orchid, a new challenge, and we'll see how we go.